She arrived in Coldwater Bend with 2 trunks, a letter of recommendation, and a reputation that arrived 3 days before she did. The reputation was wrong. Most of what people said about Eleanor Hayes was wrong. They said she was a delicate city woman who would faint at the first sight of blood. They said she'd last a month, maybe 2, before crawling back east on the same train that carried her out. They said the widower who hired her had lost his mind, bringing a governess all the way from Boston to teach his children manners in a place where manners got you nothing but a slow death. The man who came to fetch her from the station looked at her dusty traveling dress, her straight spine, her gloved hands, and he said exactly 6 words. "You won't last the first winter." Eleanor looked back at him, this tall, unsmiling man with a jaw like a fence post and eyes the color of river ice, and she answered him just as plainly. "Neither did the last 3 people who told me that." He didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. He simply lifted her trunks as though they weighed nothing and walked toward the wagon, leaving her to follow. Neither of them understood in that moment that they had just met the person who would change everything. Eleanor Hayes was 28 years old, which in the year 1884 made her something close to a spinster. She was tall for a woman, with dark hair she kept pinned in a tight knot and gray eyes that missed nothing. She was not beautiful in the way the saloon girls were beautiful. She was something harder to name. People found themselves listening when she spoke, even when they had decided beforehand to ignore her. She had been a teacher in Boston, a good one, at a school for the daughters of wealthy families. She knew Latin and arithmetic and how to set a broken finger. She knew which mushrooms killed and which ones healed, because her mother had been a midwife before the fever took her. But Eleanor carried a wound she never spoke of. Years before, she had been engaged to a man named Thomas, a doctor with kind hands and a soft voice. He had died of typhoid 2 weeks before their wedding, and she had nursed him to the very end, holding his hand as the light left him. After that, something in Eleanor had closed like a door in winter. She told herself she preferred it that way. She told herself she had everything she needed in her books and her work. The truth was that Eleanor was terribly, quietly lonely. She had come west not for adventure, but because Boston was full of streets where she and Thomas had walked, and she could no longer bear to walk them alone. The man who fetched her was named Caleb Mercer. Caleb was 34, and he wore every one of those years on his weathered face. He was a rancher, and when the territory needed one, a deputy. He was broad through the shoulders from work that never ended, and his hands were scarred from rope and barbed wire and the 1,000 small violences of frontier life. His hair was the color of dark wheat, going gray early at the temples. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his words came out flat and short, as though each one cost him something. People in Coldwater Bend respected Caleb. Few of them liked him. He had a way of looking through a person that made them feel measured and found wanting. But Caleb Mercer had not always been this way. 3 years before, his wife Sarah had died in childbirth and the baby with her. Caleb had buried them both on the hill behind his house under a cottonwood tree, and he had not spoken Sarah's name aloud since. He was left with 2 children, a boy of 9 named Samuel and a girl of 6 named Ruth, and a grief so large he did not know how to carry it and love them at the same time. So he had simply stopped trying to do either gently. He fed his children. He clothed them. He kept them alive. But the warmth in his house had been buried under that cottonwood tree, and Caleb believed, deep down, that he was the reason it would never come back. He had hired a governess because his daughter had begun to forget how to read, and because the boy was growing wild, and because a man at church had told him, carefully, that children need more than a roof. Caleb did not believe a Boston woman could give them anything. He had hired Eleanor expecting her to fail. In a strange way, he was counting on it. If she failed, he could go on believing that nothing and no one could mend what was broken in his home. The ride to the ranch took 2 hours, and they spent it in near silence. Eleanor watched the land roll past, endless gold grass, blue mountains floating at the edge of the world, a sky so wide it made her feel both small and strangely free. She decided she liked it, though she would not have told Caleb that for anything. Caleb, for his part, had already decided who she was, a pampered Easterner, a woman who had never gone hungry, never buried anyone, never worked until her hands bled. He saw the fine stitching on her gloves and thought, she'll cry within the week. He was wrong about her. She was wrong about him too. She had taken his silence for coldness, his short words for cruelty. She thought him a hard, unfeeling man who cared nothing for the children waiting at home. They were both about to learn how little they understood. The first clash came on the very first night. When they reached the ranch, the house was dark and the children had not eaten. Samuel met them at the door with a defiant chin and dirt on his face. Little Ruth hid behind her brother, peering out with enormous frightened eyes. There was no fire lit, no supper waiting, and Eleanor understood at once that this was not a home where a child had been tucked into bed in years. She set down her bag, removed her gloves, and rolled up her sleeves. "What are you doing?" Caleb asked, watching her move toward the cold stove. "These children are hungry," she said. "I'm going to feed them." "That's not your work. You're here to teach." Eleanor turned and looked at him, and for the first time her calm cracked just slightly into something fierce. "Mr. Mercer, I am here for your children. All of what they need is my work." He stared at her. She stared back. And then, without another word, she found the flour and the lard and the last of the eggs, and within the hour she had biscuits on the table and a fire in the hearth and 2 children eating as though they had not eaten properly in months. Caleb stood in the doorway and watched his daughter smile for the first time in longer than he could remember. He told himself it meant nothing. He told himself it was a trick, a performance, that the woman was only showing off. But that night, lying awake, he could not stop hearing the sound of Ruth's laughter, and he hated how much it hurt to hear it. The transformation between them came slowly, the way frost melts off a window, so gradual you cannot see it happen. Only notice afterward that the world has changed. Eleanor discovered, in pieces, that Caleb Mercer was not the cold man she had believed. She found it first in small things. She noticed how he checked on the children every night after he thought they were asleep, standing in their doorway for a long moment before turning away. She noticed how he never raised his voice to them, even when Samuel deserved it. She noticed that the harshness in him was not cruelty at all, but fear, the fear of a man who loved his children so much that he had walled himself off from them rather than risk losing one more thing he loved. One afternoon she found him mending a doll, his huge scarred hands working a tiny needle through fabric with surprising care. It was Ruth's doll, the one Sarah had made before she died. When he saw Eleanor watching, he set it down quickly, embarrassed, and walked out without a word. But Eleanor had seen his face. She had seen the tenderness he tried so hard to hide. Caleb, in turn, began to see Eleanor clearly for the first time. He saw her teach his daughter to read again, sitting patiently for hours, never once losing her temper. He saw her take his wild, angry son out to the fields and put a fishing line in his hands and listen, really listen, until the boy began, slowly, to talk about the mother he missed. He watched her break a colt with nothing but patience and a steady voice, and he realized she understood animals the way only the best ranch hands did. He watched her set the broken arm of a neighbor's child without flinching, working with the calm competence of someone who had done it 100 times. This was no pampered city woman. This was a woman of iron and grace, and Caleb did not know what to do with the way his chest tightened when she laughed. The town saw it too. Slowly, the people of Coldwater Bend stopped whispering about the Boston governess who wouldn't last. When the schoolteacher fell ill, Eleanor taught the town's children for 3 weeks without pay. When a wagon overturned on the river road, she was the one who climbed down the bank to splint a man's leg. When the preacher's wife went into a hard labor and the doctor was 40 miles away, it was Eleanor who delivered the baby and saved them both. The woman they had dismissed became, without anyone quite deciding it, the woman the whole territory turned to. But it was a night in early winter, that changed everything between Eleanor and Caleb. Ruth woke screaming from a nightmare, calling for her mother. Caleb, frozen in the doorway, did not know how to comfort her. Grief had robbed him of the words. So Eleanor went to the child, gathered her up and rocked her, humming softly until the sobs faded. And when Ruth finally slept, Eleanor looked up and saw Caleb standing there in the lamplight, his face wet with tears he had not let fall in 3 years. "I don't know how to do this," he said, and his voice broke like dry wood. "I buried her under that tree, and I buried everything good in me along with her. I look at my children and I see her face, and it hurts so much I can't reach them. I'm failing them. I'm failing every day." Eleanor stood, the sleeping child still warm against her, and she said something she had never said to anyone. "I lost someone too, a man I was going to marry. I held his hand while he died, and afterward I closed myself off because loving anyone again seemed like an invitation to that same pain." She looked at him steadily. "But you haven't failed, Caleb. A man who feels grief this deep is a man who loved deeply. Your children don't need you to be unbroken. They need you to be theirs." For a long moment neither of them moved. Something passed between them in that small lamplit room, not love yet, but the first true seeing of one soul by another. And from that night, the door that had closed in Eleanor's heart years before began, quietly, to open. The crisis came in February, with the worst blizzard the territory had seen in 20 years. It started in the afternoon as a gray smudge on the horizon and became, within hours, a roaring white wall that swallowed the world. Caleb was out on the far range bringing in cattle when it hit. By nightfall he had not returned, and the temperature had fallen low enough to kill a man in an hour. Eleanor stood at the window with the children behind her, watching the snow erase everything, and she made a decision. "Samuel," she said, "I need you to keep the fire going and watch your sister. Do not open the door for anyone but me or your father. Can you do that?" The boy's eyes were wide. "You can't go out there, you'll die." "Your father is out there," she said. "I won't leave him." She wrapped herself in every coat in the house, took a lantern and a rope, and tied one end of the rope to the porch post so she could find her way home. Then she walked into the storm. It was madness, and she knew it. The wind tore at her, the cold burned through every layer, and within minutes she could see nothing but white. She shouted his name until her voice gave out. She fell twice, the snow swallowing her to the waist. She thought of Thomas, of how she had not been able to save him, and she swore to whatever God might be listening that she would not lose another. She found him by the sound of his horse. Caleb had fallen from the saddle half a mile out, his leg pinned and broken when the animal slipped on ice. He was barely conscious, the cold already taking him, when a light appeared out of the white nothing, and a voice he knew called his name. He thought at first that he was dreaming. Then Eleanor's face was above his, fierce and frostbitten, and she was hauling him up with a strength that seemed impossible in a woman half his size. "You came," he whispered. "Of course I came," she said. "Now help me, you stubborn man, or we both die out here." She got him onto the horse. She followed the rope home, hand over frozen hand, through a storm that would have killed any soul who lost their nerve. She did not lose her nerve. She dragged him through the door, set his leg by lamplight while the children watched, and she did not sleep for 2 days as she fought the fever that followed, pressing cool cloths to his brow and willing him to live. On the 3rd night his fever broke. He opened his eyes and found her there, exhausted, her head resting beside his hand. "Why?" he asked softly. "Why would you risk your life for me?" Eleanor lifted her head. She was too tired for anything but the truth. "Because somewhere in these past months, without meaning to, I fell in love with you, Caleb Mercer, and I have lost one man I loved already. I was not going to lose another." For the first time since she had known him, Caleb Mercer smiled, a real smile, slow and warm and astonished, like the sun breaking over the eastern mountains. "I've been falling in love with you," he said. "Since the day you stepped off that train, and told me you'd outlasted everyone who doubted you. Spring came late that year, but it came. Caleb healed slowly, and as he healed, the house healed with him. There was laughter in it now, and music, and the smell of bread on Sunday mornings. He learned to reach for his children, to hold them, to say the things grief had locked away. He took Eleanor up the hill behind the house to the cottonwood tree, and he told her about Sarah, all of it, the good and the painful, and Eleanor listened without jealousy, because she understood that love does not replace what came before. It only makes room beside it. They were married in June, beneath that same cottonwood, with the whole of Coldwater Bend looking on. The people who had once whispered that the Boston governess wouldn't last the winter now crowded the hillside to celebrate her, for there was not a family in the territory she had not helped, not a soul who did not owe her some kindness. Samuel stood beside his father, tall and proud. Ruth scattered wildflowers and called Eleanor Mama for the first time, and Caleb had to look away to hide his tears. In the years that followed, Eleanor opened the first proper school in the territory and trained 2 young women in midwifery so that no mother would have to die for want of help. When folks spoke of the most respected woman in the territory, they did not have to say her name. Everyone knew who they meant. She had come west to escape a grief she thought would define her forever. She had stepped off a train into a place that promised her nothing, met by a hard man who told her she would not last the winter. She had lasted every winter after. And sometimes, on summer evenings, Caleb would look at his wife teaching their children to read on the porch, the golden light falling across her face, and he would remember those first 6 cold words he had spoken to her. He had been so certain he was right. He had been so certain that nothing broken could ever be mended. He had never in his life been so grateful to be wrong. For she had come to the frontier as a governess, a stranger nobody believed in, and she had stayed to become its heart, the woman who taught a hard land how to be gentle and taught a grieving man how to love again.